Okay, so I know that a lot of you are, most of you are serving as investigators, but we also wanted to go over with you a little bit about the role of an advisor in the hearing process. I talked some about in the investigation process and making sure they stay in their lane and you're reiterating your role and all of that good stuff. But I also wanted to point out kind of what happens for my advisors as well. So if you serve as an advisor, before you get the matter, and reminder that advisors, universities have to provide an advisor for the live hearing. So the pathway, you got the formal complaint that comes in, you got the notice of allegations, then you have the investigation with both of the review periods. The parties are entitled to an advisor of their choice during that investigation with limited participation, as explained in your policy that we went through before. And then once the investigation is done, it moves on to this required live hearing. If a party does not have an advisor at that point, the university is responsible to providing an advisor to that party, to the complainant or the respondent for a particular purpose. So if you end up serving as an advisor and you could potentially be given a matter and meet this person at the end of this whole process in the beginning of the live hearing process. So I just like to point that out because a lot happens between that report all the way to the live hearing. So a reminder, if they don't have one, they'll be assigned one, which could be you if you're serving as an advisor. And the advisor speaks on behalf of the party for cross only and gets copied on that written determination and any pre-hearing conferences they're included in and things like that. So they have a limited role. So what the regs say, this is directly from the regs, is that they must be permitted to ask relevant questions, including questions challenging credibility of the other party and any witnesses. So that can never be done directly by a party. It has to be live, orally, in real time. And decision makers will then be making live determinations as to each question, whether it's relevant or not, and they're going to allow that answer. So I have a whole training for advisors in Title IX University, but a couple things I just wanted to highlight, and we talked about this earlier with investigators and the advisors, is there are rules of decorum. So this is kind of a slide we do for our decision makers that, again, those advisors must abide by the rules of decorum. So as an employee, if you are put in the position of serving as an advisor, just a reminder to you about that, and that, you know, our decision makers are going to be the ones that are kind of setting the tone for the hearing, ensuring all the rules are followed, all that kind of stuff. So some tips for my advisors that I just wanted to point out. Number one thing we've learned from serving in the role of advisors on the ground is it takes quite a bit of time to review all the investigation, review everything, get up to speed, and then to think about what questions you think you want to ask on cross of the other party or witnesses. It requires meeting with the party to kind of think through those things. There's just a whole lot that goes into it. When you get to that hearing, just a reminder to be kind. Again, it's not your time to play attorney. Now, there could be an attorney for a party on the other side of you who is not being so kind. That doesn't mean you have to behave the same way. Just always remembering it's a university process. These are community members. You have a job to do, which is to ask questions of the other party, but you don't have to do it in as adversarial as a manner as an attorney might approach it. You also need to be available. Lots of deadlines and things that have to be adhered to, and you're trying to schedule meetings schedule the hearing, which can be pretty difficult to get everyone's schedules figured out, and then just get any clarity from Kristen or Aaron on your role or questions you might have in serving in that role. Some food for thought. Some of this might be for Kristen and Aaron as much as anyone, but it's good for the whole team to think about and understand what could happen. So a party refuses to communicate with you as an advisor. So you're assigned as an advisor, the person will not talk to you. What do? You know, my recommendation is you go ahead and prepare questions and things based on the report that you have, and just do the best you can to prepare questions for the other party and any witnesses. For you all as investigators, this can also happen. in your investigative capacity, where a party just stops communicating, stops participating. And so you will, Kristen or Aaron will be there as a resource to figure out what to do next. But we've even had parties that say, like, I do not want you to communicate with me ever again. And we always say it gets awkward because you're still going to share things with them as though they're participating, which can make them really mad. So in those review periods. For my advisors, we've talked a lot about conflicts of interest. The regs don't specify that advisors can or cannot have a conflict of interest. But what if you feel like you have one? What if you're working with, it comes up more often than not with respondent, but let's say you're working with a respondent and you feel like you just can't do that. You don't feel comfortable, or there is an actual conflict of interest. Just thinking through how you would handle that if you're appointed as an advisor and you're in that situation. What if, and that would never happen here, your Title IX coordinators is not including you or providing appropriate notices to your party. We've had that happen when we're serving as advisors for institutions. We had one case where an advisor for a complainant and the institution said, we're going to have a hearing in 2 weeks. And a month and a half later, still heard nothing. What is your role in that situation, right? It's not going to happen in y'all's case, but just to think about, if Kristen or Aaron, went poof tomorrow and someone else is in the role and they didn't know what they were doing, what are you going to do? Or your party is not coming across well. We worked with a party who on Zoom, every time we met with that person, it wasn't me, it was Celeste. In this case, it was a respondent and it was a male. He would not participate on camera. And then when he did participate on camera, you couldn't really see him. He was kind of off like in this corner with the hoodie on. And so, thinking through, if your party's not coming across well, how do you handle that? How do you help encourage them to bring their best foot, put their best foot forward for a case? And that can get tricky, but we do have, as advisors, we have those conversations with our parties to say, you're going to want to dress more professional in a hearing, things like that, to try to just help them out. Now, does that really fall under your role? It's arguable. You're not an advocate. You're not a lawyer hired by them. But as an advisor, I would encourage you, to encourage them to kind of put their best foot forward. But it gets a little blurry sometimes, and it gets hard when you're appointed as an advisor, you're talking to this student or this employee. Often, you're thinking about the case from their perspective only. That's your job, is to think of questions to ask the other party and the witnesses. Where does that line begin and end of an advocate versus an advisor? Because you're technically not an advocate, you're not their lawyer. And so reminding them of your role, again, really important when you're serving as an advisor, and the limitations of your role, because managing expectations really is everything. And the parties can get confused and want more of you than really you're required to give. So you just want clarity, again, from your Title IX coordinator or deputy or whoever your contact person is on the limitations of your role and expectations. And then just remembering there are bases for appeal, but they don't include, failure to adequately represent a party, or the conflict of interest as a basis for appeal is specific to coordinators, investigators, and decision makers. Nonetheless, you're going to want to put in as much time as you can, and you're going to want to bring any conflicts of interest to Kristen or Aaron, just to be sure that you're thinking through everything. Go ahead, Kristen.
I was going to say, as an advisor, if you notice that the person you're representing needs additional supportive measures or resources, or maybe they need a support person or an advocate, you can always reach out to me and Aaron, and we can help connect them to that supportive measure or to that advocate or to that resource. Don't feel like you have to take on that role all upon yourself. We are still a resource, even though you're going through the process with somebody and you're representing somebody.
Yes, 100 and 800,000%. Because, and it happens too with investigators, obviously you're going to have somebody from your Title IX leadership in these meetings, but things come up all the time where people need support. But yes, you are not alone as an advisor. It is not all on you to do all the things for that party. So definitely remember there's other resources available, and Kristen or Aaron can help get that party to those resources. It's not on you to, be all the things, that they're a counselor and the advisor and an advocate and, all that. Okay, that's everything I have for the slides, but let's stop here for any questions. Any other questions you may have about process, just anything that I've talked about. If you have that, bring forward now, don't be shy. And then I'm going to break you up probably into just 2 or 3 small groups to go through the first hypo, but we're going to give kind of a big break for time to read it, and then come together as your group in your breakout group. But any questions before we get into that? Y'all have been awesome and asking really, really great questions. So there's a hypo labeled hypo 2. That means that's the second one we'll go through if we have time. So we're going to start with the first one that was sent to you. And I had it pulled up, I think, but let me make sure. Should be this one. Hold on, let me go share my screen. Sorry. Should look like this one with Layla and Cindy. And what I'm going to have you do is read all the way through the complainant. And in your smaller group, I break you into some of these first questions are procedural questions that we've covered, and that will likely never happen. But I would say talk through them just briefly. Really what I want you to be thinking about is starting here about how you should start the meeting, and then these other questions. So what I want you to do is take a good 10 minutes or so individually to read it. During that time, I'm going to be putting in your breakout rooms, and then go join your breakout room with the other person or people to talk through those. And then I will bring you back in probably 25 minutes, maybe ish, as a bigger group. You'll see me say that the breakout session is ending, and I'll bring you back in to kind of talk about it as a group. So it is 10 till, and hold on, I've got to do some math and also respond to a child. Okay, so it is 10 till 1 my time. Let's come back at, actually, let's do this, since I know we still have a little over an hour, right, Kristen? The time change is throwing me off.
Yeah, so we're an hour behind you.
Right.
Before you, so it's 11:48 here.
Yes, and we're ending at 2 my time, 1 your time, correct? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, thank you for that. Space-time continuum, yes. It always drives me crazy. Okay, so let's come back at 30 after, but let's do this, actually 35 after, so it's gonna be a pretty big break. Go ahead and read through it all as your small group. So take 15 minutes to just read it all, and then come back and work through each question. I'm gonna put Kristen and Aaron in different groups. So that way, if you all have procedural questions or things that are coming to mind as you work through it, you have time as a team to talk about it as a smaller group. Then we'll come back in together and talk about what you talked about, if that makes sense, okay? And then we may not have time to get into the other hypo, which is fine, but let's kind of start with that because that's enough, and then we'll come back. So I will start to put you into the 2 smaller groups. Take your 15 minutes or so, come back to your group at like 5 after. So get a bigger break, eat some lunch, do what you need to do, and then read and take some time to read, and then come back to your smaller group and y'all start discussing it. Does that make sense? Clear as mud? It's hard to do virtually sometimes, but we got this. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start assigning that, and then you will start to see, you'll start to see me do that, but you go ahead and go read, take your break, and then you'll see yourself get assigned. If you have any issues, just stay right here and come back and I'll get you where you need to be. Is that good, Kristen? Okay, excellent. Just making sure everyone's good. All right, let me try to remember how many we have. 1, 2. Okay, So y'all go ahead and go, or you can mute or do whatever. Just make sure to go into your room by 5 after. So take some time to think, read the questions and all that good stuff. Okay, so procedurally, you are fortunate because you have kind of touch points for a lot of that beginning part of the process, or when complaints or issues come up with a party and they need supportive measures or something like that. I think in general, you know where you need to go. And so that's why I was saying in that hypo to not spend as much time on those beginning questions, like what if an NOA is forgotten or something like that, because it's unlikely to happen, but you never know. And so you always want to help each other out. If you see something that's missing procedurally as an investigator or have a question, you're, like I said, you're very fortunate you have a pretty buttoned up operation in that regard. I talked to you guys, or I mentioned in there about practicing introduction or explanation of process. I know in Kristen's group, there were some questions that came up there procedurally. I don't know, Kristen, if there's anything you think would be worth sharing that y'all were talking about for the group at large about the process and the introductions and how it's assigned and roles and all of that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, basically what happens in the pre-meeting, we pull together the group of 3 that are going to be doing the investigation. We give y'all an opportunity to talk amongst yourselves to figure out who's going to take the lead role for the investigation, as well as who's going to take the lead role for the report writing and how you want to go about doing that. We do give some discretion to each group because we understand that sometimes there are some people who like really Jones on writing the report and that's their strong suit and that's what they want to do and not necessarily the question asking aspect. Or maybe the head person for the team wants to be the main one that asks questions and so everyone else submits questions and they give it to that person. Or maybe that person asks the bulk of the questions and then opens the floor to the other parties just so there's not a lot of confusion when the actual interview happens because there are 3 of you that will be sitting in the room. So we do talk about that at length in the pre-meeting to kind of figure out what that dynamic is going to look like on top of providing you with the script for when you're in there in person with the party. But for the investigation piece, I'm the one who sits in on the room with you. So if you ever have any questions throughout the process, I'm there to help assist. And then Erin sits in with the actual hearing piece.
Erin, was there anything else y'all talked about from an introductory standpoint in your group that would be helpful for the rest of the group?
No, we didn't talk about introductions.
Okay. And I learned something from Wes today that actually some of my team told me, and it kind of I just didn't think about it and it hit me more today, was about asking about preferred pronouns and calling them your chosen name. I don't know, Wes, if you want to reiterate how you said it, but it really resonated with me. I wrote it down. So if you want to share that.
Yeah, so like what we talk about in our office is just asking like their chosen name or chosen pronouns so that they kind of like take control over that. And it just shows more inclusivity. So like it might not be for, you or them or whatever they want, but it just shows that like you're more inclusive and we know more pronouns with the LGBTQ community. So when we use them, it just actively opens up a super inclusive space for them to act and be however they want. So I usually just ask them like, hey, what are your pronouns? Mine are they, them. And it just opens it more up for them to be whatever gender identity or gender expression they want. It just opens it up for that conversation of more inclusivity.
Awesome, thank you. So I know there's a question about Cindy. You asked Cindy for additional witnesses and she lists Sam, who's also her advisor. And I was in Kristen's room when this came up and they were just mentioning that your policy doesn't allow for a witness to serve as an advisor. And so if that comes up, your trustee leadership will come in and help you out, but just wanted to point that out. Then it notes she also lists Dr. Thompson, the Dean of Students, who usually serves as a decision maker. So clearly in that situation, Kristen or Erin are going to ensure Dr. Thompson is not your hearing officer in that case, but just something to think about. There are times, and again, you have the benefit of Erin or Kristen in the investigation interviews, but sometimes just weird things happen and you learn information that they're not going to always learn. So just keeping an ear out no matter what is helpful. And then she doesn't want to give you the names of any other students who may be witnesses because she doesn't want to quote unquote drag them into her drama. However, she does give the names of others who are clearly witnesses when she's telling her account of what happened. So what do you do as an investigator? What did y'all talk about? Should you reach out to them even though she's asking you not to?
Yeah, our group said yes. It's part of our job as an investigator to investigate all things that come up that are helpful to the investigation, especially since the burden is on us as members of the university, as that investigation team, to collect all of the evidence that we need.
Perfect. Well said. And so what are you going to say to her? Are you going to let her know? What's your approach there?
Yes, well, with guidance and with training and with coordination with the coordinator, we would let her know that even though this is an uncomfortable process and an uncomfortable part of the process, it's kind of in our due diligence to collect this information, and those people will have the option to participate or not participate, but that is the fair process that that is the fair way to, or that is the way to ensure a fair process.
Exactly. Yeah, I love it. And so just important, I always say transparency is kindness. It's hard in this process because you're having to tell people things they don't want to hear sometimes, but the more transparent we can be, the better. Sometimes the Title IX coordinator is telling them something in that intake, or the deputy, and you're telling them, and they still later will say no one ever told them because they're stressed out. They're not necessarily, all there trying to process everything most of the time. Sometimes they're, advisors are being difficult and act like things didn't happen that did in your process. But by and large, it's a lot to understand as a party going through the process. So you want to be as transparent as possible, and you really can't, there's really no such thing as being too communicative on some of those issues. And I really like the way you phrase that. Okay, so going into the respondent, I know there's a million questions in here. Anything you all want to tell me in general with these first couple of questions, where someone's threatening to sue if you don't dismiss? That's can be common, and obviously you're just going to tell your coordinator, but there's nothing you can do about that except just keep on following your process. When you have someone who won't attend, what are your thoughts there? So Layla's saying, I'm not coming no matter what.
I think part of the process is that we can't force students to make, oh, sorry, you can't. But part of the process is we can't force students to do things that they don't want to do. And so the process will carry on with the complainant.
Yeah.
But we can't force her to be a part of the process. So that's not something that we would pursue. If she decides to come back into the process, of course she could, but that's not something that we can continue to turn our wheels about.
Yeah, and so one thing I will say, and I'm sure you all would do this, or your lead investigator, is if I have a party that just never participates, I still, before at each step, have another opportunity for them to re-engage. So before the review of evidence, hey, I'm finalizing interviews. I would love to speak with you. And then, maybe again, before you finalize the report or something, and just leaving the door open, as you said, of if you change your mind, we're here kind of thing, but we'll have to proceed forward. So eventually she does decide to come and meet with you and says that her dad is going to participate as her advisor. Everybody good with that? She can have an advisor of choice. So nothing really earth shattering there. Of course, he's dad and attorney and all the things, and that's fine. What happens if you have this issue with the police department? So we have the local police department calls you to let you know that Cindy's gone to the police and he wants to come to the meeting. What do you think your coordinators are going to do in that situation? Allow the police officer to attend? Not, depends. What do you think? What did your people say?
It's a no for me. Sorry.
She's like, no.
I would either.
So I would tell you that I personally would say it depends, and it's going to be up to Kristen and Aaron. Something I would consider from a trauma-informed standpoint is how many times somebody has to have an interview, but it's still your university investigation. So it's completely discretionary, and there can be a lot of complicating factors to that question. Not a trick question on purpose, but certainly something y'all would have to talk about as a team. Go ahead, Aaron.
NECA actually brought up a really, I didn't know the answer to question while we were discussing this. So our policy allows for each party to have an advisor and a support person, right? So the support person isn't allowed to speak. They're just there, comfort supporting. What if Sergeant Toms is her support person?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know how you distinguish between the two, a support person and an advisor. I haven't looked at the policy in a minute, but if it's someone, if you don't have any limitations and it can be a person of their choosing, then it can get interesting. I always say, and every university takes a different approach, so it is fine with whatever y'all want to do, but even the example of a witness as an advisor, technically they're allowed an advisor of their choice. I know in your policy you have a thing, but what we try to tell the parties is we try to explain to them about maintaining the integrity of the process, and that if they have this particular person come or whatever, you'd say it in a much more finessed way than I am right now, that it really could impact the integrity of the process, and try to not dissuade them, but dissuade them. That's been a line that I use a lot if we run into a situation it's a little complex like that. But it's a good question. I don't have the answer either. I would say you've got to get in the situation and kind of look at all the facts and what's happening. And I know that sounds like I'm punting, but it's just the reality, because in one case, you may have one little fact that you would be like, it's fine. And in another case, one different fact and everything else the same. And you would say, we're not going to do that. So all food for thought, which is why I gave it to you.
At the end of the day on that, if I'm the other person, I'm uncomfortable, I can shut it down right then and there and be done. I'm walking out.
If you're the support person and you're uncomfortable?
No, if Sergeant Toms comes into the room and I'm the other person, if I didn't want to be involved in that, I can shut the investigation down right then and there, right? My part of
the meeting, you mean?
Yeah.
As the investigator?
No.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
No,
So-
I think you're talking about the respondent. The respondent can choose to remove themselves from the meeting.
Yes.
They feel intimidated.
And well, I was going to say, we discussed if Sergeant Toms was going to be Layla's support person, then Sergeant Toms, not in uniform, and is introduced as Donald Toms, not Officer Toms, right? Because the support person doesn't speak. They are simply there, right? So not adding that layer of the attorney father as the advisor and the officer support person, you're now intimidating the bejesus out of everybody in the room, right? Keeping it as neutral as possible would be our.
Exactly.
So one of my questions would be then, I guess on the criminal side, this is outside of the realm, I'm getting off the subject, would be, can he use that information then in the criminal investigation? As a support person, I would say no, because police officers have certain things they have to abide by in order to get all their detective work done and everything like that. So, but I would be clear. I think it's a great point. I would be clear. Again, it's just like the knowing your role part. It's not just your role, but everyone else being crystal clear on what their role is and what in this particular process. So it's a really good point that I hope y'all never run into. But if you do, at least we've thought about it together. Okay, let me jump over to Layla's father emails you and tells you she will not be participating, but provides you with a list of witnesses to interview. So do you interview those witnesses even though Layla's not participating?
We all agree for the most part, yes. So just because just because a party is checked out, if they're giving you things in writing and all of that, then I would include it. What if a party says, I will not meet with you, but I will provide you, I want all the questions in writing and I will respond to them. Dun, dun, dun. What are you gonna do? We've had someone do this and I did not like it. What do y'all think? Kristen and Aaron, do you have any thoughts on what you think you do in that circumstance?
I mean, I have thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we try to allow them to participate as much as possible. So even though it's not ideal that they participate that way, if that's how they choose to participate, that's how they choose to participate. But just being transparent with them that all the responses will be shared with the other party and that they would have to make sure that they're sending their responses to an email that is associated with them so we can clarify that it is them sending that response. But being aware that if all they're providing us is written statement, that might impact the decision-making process in the hearing.
Yep.
And
No, I
because
agree
they're
with
not
you.
right, because they're not being subjected to cross-examination or for follow-up questions with cross-examination. It's just, here's my answer, and there's no depth or no diving to it. Then if I'm an investigator for that, it changes how I receive that information.
Yes. And I agree with all those and giving those caveats. And what I've seen is we've done it. I hate it, but and then we have done follow-up questions and it's just all been in writing. But I agree with Kristen in the idea of being more inclusive. You know, if that's how they want to participate, that's what we do. But it's definitely not ideal. And hopefully, again, it won't happen to you, but it could. What about this issue with a witness who admits that she's been paid to participate? Do you still include that witness's information? Like, what are you doing with it?
We didn't hit on that part if we include her information or not. We talked about sharing the information that she was paid, but I don't know, because
So you would share, you're saying it would all be in there so it gets shared with the other party, right? Or with both parties, because it'd be in their interview notes.
we were saying
such.
sharing the information that she shared with Kristen that she was paid to serve as a witness by the father. But I don't remember, and maybe I zoned out, but I don't remember what our details were about, like saying if we would include that, because then my thought process would be like, do I need to set up another interview to go over what you shared with me to verify the credibility of the information you gave me before? Is there anything you want to share now that you've shared that information? Or ask like, hey, were you lit? I don't know if that's a leading question or not, but were you were paid, but were you led to say something specifically? Because it said that the other people were saying things verbatim, but you were the only person that shared that you were paid. And I probably wouldn't share that with the person that shared that they were paid, but if you were paid to serve as a witness, you could have been paid to share stories. So I wouldn't ask that, but I would say, well, is there anything else that you would like to share? Is there anything that you thought of that maybe changed since the first time we had this conversation that you would like to add to your statement to get more clarification?
Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts? I know we're about to get to time. And I agree with you. I think I would explore it. I think it would be included. If they're going to come as a witness for a party, then I think the other party has a right to know that. It's, you know, could be a credibility concern and all of that. But, you know, it's interesting. I'm trying to think of what else, if there's anything else I specifically wanted us to talk about before we, I know you're never going to, on the report, you're never going to forget an advisor because you've got checks and balances. So you don't have to worry about that. This is in the last section. We do have a lot of times, and I know you've got your folks that'll help you with this, but where advisors are given their 10 days and they don't come back until day 15. Right now we have a situation where we've got attorney advisors and they're like, my docket's very busy and I have not had time to look at this till now, and you will accept my comments and things like that. So we have had challenges to that. And so I just would say a reminder of, just being equitable. If you allow extension for one party, you allow it for the other. If you're allowing a lot of delays before you interview someone because they just can't be available, that you're doing that for the other party if they need it, things like that. And then I know there was some conversation in Erin's room about informal resolution. So just pointing out that if a party asks, they can ask for informal resolution anytime between when a formal complaint is filed or signed in the end, when the written determination is done. And so again, having Erin or Kristen in the room, if you start hearing someone's like, hey, I'm interested in informal resolution, sometimes they'll put that in writing. I don't want to do this anymore. Can I do this other thing? Just to remember to go back to them and let them know it has to be voluntary between the parties. It will pull it out of your process, this formal bubble, grievance process bubble, and it'll go in its own bubble of informal resolution, which is handled by mediators on your campus that are designated to do that. If it is not successful in the informal resolution bubble, then it could come back to you. But in successes, they have to agree on everything. The parties have to agree on everything, including the sanctions. So just to point out to you, it can go in and out of the formal grievance process. And that is normal and can definitely happen. So just wanted to let you know that there's a whole process that goes behind informal resolution of giving notice and things like that. So you just want to make sure that if a party tells you that, you're letting Kristen or Erin know so that they can talk with the other party and see what their interests are. But again, you have a lot of checks and balances for that. So you have that hypo too that we didn't have time to get to. And that hypo, if you decide to do it on your own or as a tabletop as a team, is really to start thinking about what kind of questions an advisor would ask in a hearing of the other party. But it'll also help you to be thinking about as an investigator, and in this case too, what questions would I have asked? How would I have asked it? Nega was getting into that earlier. It's interesting. You think you know how you'd ask something, and then you kind of get in it and you're like, oh wait, that was leading. It's okay. You can, a leading question will come out of your mouth. Like, it's okay. You will ask questions awkwardly at some point. That's okay too. The biggest takeaway I want for you is to be yourself, to take a breath when you're handed a case and you're on this team of investigators, to really think about how you want to approach it, what you're going to do in that pre-meeting, which is hugely helpful. And that you just know that this is really important, helpful work. And they know, I know it's not your only job. And so, it does take kind of stepping away from that day-to-day to focus on this other thing. And it can be all consuming if it's a complex case. And it can be heavy stuff, be hard stuff. I go to bed at night thinking about things often. But you just do what you got to do, use your professional judgment, and you're going to be great. And you've got your fearless leaders to help you out as well. So I think that is everything. Kristen said something in here in my chat that I just missed. So I didn't know if there's anything else, Kristen or Erin, you wanted to note for the group as we close out.
I just want to reiterate the importance of documentation. Documentation. I know there's concern sometimes with people joining the team about the possibility of getting sued or possibility of people saying you did or didn't do certain things. As long as you're documenting and you're acting in the capacity of your role, staying in your lane, you will be protected by the institution. You'll be protected by me and Erin. We are always here as a support for you to help you through the process. Our goal is to make this as painless as possible for you, because we understand that you have other roles at the institution, and we're very thankful for you feeling this role that we cannot feel. So as we work through this, if you ever have questions, even if we've already had the prep meeting, even if we already talked through some things, if you still have follow-up questions, we're always here to help and assist you.
Yes, I would say that's usually what I usually ask when we're in person, what's your biggest fear about serving in this role? And it's always getting sued, asking the wrong question. Getting sued, asking the wrong question, sometimes not being thorough enough. So I don't want you to lead with fear when you get a case. Like Kristen just said, you have a huge support system that a lot of schools don't have. So, you're going to be just fine. The likelihood of getting sued is high. It's the reality of this space in general. So if not you, but the university, these cases are very contentious. And if you just read the news, you can see that. So if that does happen to you where your investigation is the subject of a lawsuit, it's okay. It does not mean you did everything wrong. It's just, unfortunately, the world that we're in at this point in Title IX space. So with that, thank you all for being so engaging and participatory. It was really fun. I hope that I get to come meet you in person. I know I've already met EK and Kristen. I met you in person, right? Or were you not there yet when I came? Yeah. But I hope that I get to meet you in person sometime. Dee Dee Anderson is one of my dear friends. We worked together for a long time. If you know her, she's a rock star. And so I want any excuse I can have to come and see y'all and see her. But I hope you have a great rest of the day. Good luck with everything. I'll stay on for a minute or two, Kristen and Aaron, to see if you need anything else. But just thank you for all you do. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great meeting, everyone.